Okay, so welcome. Thank you, everyone, for being here with us today for our webinar with the Public Knowledge Project, Free, Easy, Essential, Future-Proof Your Scholarly Record with the PKP Preservation Network. I'm Kate Shuttleworth, Community Education Manager with the Public Knowledge Project. I'm speaking to you today from my home in British Columbia, Canada, on the unceded territory of the Katzie First Nation. You're very welcome if you'd like to give a quick introduction to yourself in the chat and share where you're calling in from today. I will introduce our speakers in just a moment, but first I have a few quick points we'll just quickly cover. The first is that you'll notice that your video and microphone is turned off. You are very welcome and invited to please use the chat or the Q&A throughout the webinar. We will save the questions until the end, but we'll have plenty of time for questions with our presenters at the end. And at that point, we will invite you to unmute and raise your hand to ask a question if you'd like to. We also have captioning enabled in Zoom. If you'd like to use it, you should see the captioning settings in the bottom of your screen. But if you have any issues with that, please feel free to send me a private message on Zoom and I can help with that. The webinar is being recorded and we will distribute the recording in the coming days. And I will share a copy of our presenter slides in the chat right after I give this introduction as well, so you're welcome to follow along with the slides. So with that, I'm very happy to introduce our speakers today. With us, we have Mark Jordan, Associate Dean of Libraries Digital Strategy at Simon Fraser University, and Mariya Maistrovskaya, Senior Publishing Support Specialist at the Public Knowledge Project. We're very excited to hear from both of our presenters today about opportunities for journals to take some steps to safeguard the scholarly record through the PKP Preservation Network. So with that, I will hand it over to our presenters.
Thank you very much, Kate. Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. This is the outline for today's webinar, and as you can see, we're going to move from the general to the specific. I'm going to offer some background on digital preservation kind of as a set of activity, and then transition into the PKP Preservation Network, at which point I'll hand it over to Mariya to cover the specifics of the PKP Preservation Network. So why preserve? I just want to preface all this by saying there is digital preservation is a fairly mature discipline with a lot of variation within it, depending on the intended audience for the content that's being preserved and the kinds of infrastructure and organizational capabilities of the organization doing the preservation. I'll start with a longish quote. This is the first. There's two slides, but I like this quote because I think it captures the essential problems of digital preservation, which are not always easy to articulate. This quote is from the LOCKSS team. LOCKSS, this is the technology and the organization that enables distributed digital preservation in a sustainable, low-cost way. But I'll read the quote and to add my own emphasis, if you don't mind. The goal of a digital preservation system is that the information it contains remains accessible to users over a long period of time. The key problem in the design of such a system is that the period of time is very long, that's for the information, much longer than the lifetime of individual storage media, hardware, and software components, and the formats in which the information is encoded. This is an essential point because it underscores this difference and the tension between the expected timelines for access to the information in a system and the technical capabilities and technical durability of a particular system. But I'm going to add, in a few minutes, I'm going to add a third dimension, an organizational durability dimension. I'll resume. If the period were shorter, it would be simple to satisfy the requirement by storing the information on a suitably long-lived media embedded in a system of similarly long-lived hardware and software. But no media, hardware, or software exists whose longevity designers can place such confidence, meaning that there is no technology that on its own can last as long as the intended lifespan of the information that the technology contains. And that is the essential problem of digital preservation, trying to ensure that the information in a system or series of generations of systems is still accessible while dealing with the short-lived nature of technology. And to further elaborate on this important point, because I think it does underscore the essential function of digital preservation, I'm going to offer this diagram. The typical lifespan of a publication access platform here is 10 years. And by that, I mean a particular website, for example, or other kinds of medium that we use to share information or share knowledge. And I choose 10 years not because it's a hard and fast rule, but because it's kind of a typical lifespan. In fact, that's probably longer than most systems last, most individual systems. Of course, there are things like upgrades to a system like OJS, which surpass 10 years. But that's a little bit of an exception. Most systems that we use to distribute knowledge do not last that long on their own. However, the expectation for access to the content in any system will be typically much longer than the lifespan of that system. So here I've chosen to show five periods of 10 years, but you can extend that indefinitely into the future. So you already see the tension forming here. There are a number of challenges or constraints that highlight this tension and make it even more visible. Two of them are technical durability and organizational durability. Technical durability is the kind of thing that the LOX team mentioned in the previous quotation. No system or piece of software can live that long. Organizational durability is the tendency for organizations to be short-sighted. And in particular, this matters when it comes to digital preservation, because digital preservation, the goal of digital preservation is to make the content that's being preserved accessible in the unknown or indeterminate future. And most organizations, libraries, publishers, doesn't matter who they are typically, aren't very good at that kind of long game. They tend to focus on much shorter time spans, particularly budgetary time spans. So years, 5-year budget planning cycles and so forth. There's kind of a combination of things here under technical and organizational that I'll cover briefly. One of them is role definition. So who is responsible in a given organization that's performing digital preservation for the various kinds of technical work that needs to happen to ensure that the information in a system or a series of systems over time is accessible. That's not always clear or changes depending on other factors like staffing, budgets, and other kinds of things like that. Another one is metadata. So this is not technical and not organizational. It's a little bit of both and a little bit more than that. Metadata is an important underlying glue or plumbing that enables long-term digital preservation, because we tend to focus on the content of articles and so forth in the OJS context, for example. But without different kinds of metadata to support that long-term access, the access is very much weakened. And an specific example I'll offer is structural metadata. So that is the kinds of metadata that determine how different parts of an information object, like a journal, relate to each other. So in the OJS world, we think it's a journal. We have a journal, we have issues, we have articles. And that's sort of obvious to us in the OJS world. But other kinds of information, it is not so obvious. For example, if you take a book, for example, and you digitize it, a print book, you digitize it, you need to be able to indicate over a long period of time in a way that is discernible to different systems over time and different humans over time, the order in which those pages should be organized or presented to an end user. So these kinds of metadata are not easy to maintain over time. They're susceptible to human error and susceptible to technical error. But again, a very important kind of intersection between technical durability and organizational durability, which we don't often think about, but are essential to robust digital preservation over time. One of the most frequently asked questions around preservation is, what is the difference between digital preservation and ordinary backups that you typically see? The short answer is backups are a snapshot in time, and that's kind of it. Preservation is much longer, has a much longer arc, and it actively mitigates the kinds of threats to access over a much longer period of time. Backups are operational, they're for restoring systems. They tend to capture large quantities of data as opposed to little bits of data, and they don't have a long lifespan. Typically, backups will be cycled off the end of a backup cycle a year or several months after they're taken, and new ones will fill in at the front. So it's really a snapshot in time, moving over time. But no consideration for things like the file formats that the information is in. The intention of a backup is to be able to restore it quickly. The assumption there is that the software the file format that is being backed up, that is containing the information, will be readable in software when the backup is restored. Preservation doesn't assume any of that. Preservation takes a much longer view. It focuses on the content and the metadata that's used to structure that content and describe that content. Sound digital preservation very much takes into account things like that would have happened over long periods of time, like natural disasters, earthquakes, for example. So focusing on the LOCKSS principles for a second, the lots of copies keep stuff safe. That's what that acronym stands for. One of the underlying assumptions in LOCKSS is that you have several copies, let's say 3 at a minimum, and that those copies are distributed geographically across a wide area. This is to mitigate, around the globe. This is to mitigate things like local threats to infrastructure due to earthquakes, tornadoes, things of that nature. If you have multiple copies in one place, one earthquake can wipe out all the copies. If you have multiple copies spread around the globe, it is much, much less likely that a single natural disaster or political disaster will jeopardize all 3 copies. The last point in the left-hand column mentions a dark archive. This is somewhat challenging to get your head around in some ways, but if you go back to this slide, I'll try to offer my explanation of a dark archive. A dark archive means that the content is not publicly accessible. It is behind. It's protected and only accessible to specific people, even if that content is open access content or designed to be free to the reading public. And the reason that that's important distinction between a dark archive and a bright archive is a dark archive is much better at mitigating against the kinds of specific challenges that a given platform offers, whereas it can abstract the data and information quite a bit more, such that it is much more less dependent on a particular platform. So in this case here, a dark at the bottom, where we have this long-term expectation of access to the content, putting it in a dark archive as opposed to a bright archive means that we can structure that data and use processes and tools and other kinds of technical means to ensure that it lives throughout that 10, 20, 30, 50-year lifespan. If it was in a bright archive, it would be susceptible to the kinds of things that a particular website, for example, is susceptible to. Very short lifespan. So a dark archive basically means a more durable archive in a lot of ways. That could be debatable, but that's how I understand it. Moving on to OJS a little bit here. Why do we want to preserve OJS content? Well, most importantly and most abstractly, but most pressing, is that we want to ensure the long-term access to that content. And by long-term, again, here, I mean, there's no timeline. It could be 50 years, it could be 15 years, 50, doesn't really matter. It's as long as the stewards of that content feel that it is important to retain access to that content or provide access to that content. So long arc, long term. Secondly, it demonstrates to the users of those journals, whether the readers or subscribers or whoever, that your organization is taking proactive steps to ensure the long-term access to that journal, and demonstrating that it's that important, basically. And finally, in some cases, other organizations that are important to yours will require or want you to demonstrate that you're doing this. This is a little bit different from the second point. Second point is more general. Third one is more of a compliance requirement. So we look at DOAJ and Plan S, for example, PubMed Central. They all have requirements around having your content in a trusted preservation service. This slide doesn't pertain specifically to OJS or the PKP PN, but it's useful to think about other ways you can help ensure the long-term access to your content. First of all, priority number one is put your content in a preservation service like the PKP PN. The PKP PN is not the only service, but it is free and easy, as our opening slide mentions. And if you are running any journal on OJS, you are able to take advantage of the PKP Preservation Network free of charge. There are a lot of other small granular things you can do that add up to a big impact in terms of longevity and long-term access to your content. First one is DOIs, assigned DOIs, which make the URL to your content durable. That's very important because even though the content may be in a dark archive somewhere and safe over the long term, being able to identify that content uniquely, and in the case of DOIs, resolve to it when it is accessible to the public, is very important. Non-proprietary openly supported file formats is not as important now as it was in the past, because now we're much better at writing software that can read proprietary formats. However, technically it's easier, but legally it is not easier. Because there are some file formats, believe it or not, that the owners of those formats do not want you to read them unless you are using their software. So if you choose non-proprietary or open formats, and here I'm talking about PDF, TIFF, XML, things of that nature, then as opposed to Microsoft Word, Excel, things of that nature, then it is much more likely that in the future you or your great-great-grandchildren are going to be able to read that content, use that content without worrying about having to have a license for the software that can access it. The third point there is basically promoting OJS and pushing you toward the PKP Preservation Network. That's what that point is. Similar to the point I just covered about non-proprietary file formats, having clarity in license information and copyright information will only make people's jobs easier in the future. It will be difficult for stewards of the content 30 years from now to do anything meaningful with it if they don't know they are allowed to do it. And in particular, if they are associated with a risk-adverse organization like a university, for example, who may not want them to do anything with that content unless they can demonstrate that they are allowed to legally. And there are lots of other kind of general guides like this one on the web for documenting best practices around easy to implement digital preservation activities, like the one that we point to here. Going to transition now more from general digital preservation considerations to the PKP PN. So the PKP PN is a free preservation service for OJS journals. It doesn't matter if you're a toll publisher, open access, small independent journal, doesn't really matter. As long as you're running OJS and you meet certain technical requirements like a minimum version of OJS, for example, and you are willing to accept the terms of use of the PKP PN, which are fairly uh, easy to accept and you don't have to sign a contract. You can use the OJS, you can use the PKP PN. It uses the LOX preservation platform. I've mentioned this already. This is a long, well-proven preservation platform coming out of Stanford University, whose underlying assumption is that if you have multiple copies, multiple geographically distributed copies of content, it is going to be a lot more likely that that content will survive a single catastrophic event. And also secondarily that because it is distributed, it allows interesting collaborations across institutions because institutions can participate in the network of preservation nodes. That is to say, they can run a LOX server and keep a copy of that content as part of a collaboration. And that's exactly how the PKP PN operates. It's a dark archive, meaning it is not publicly accessible until a journal has entered a trigger event, which we'll talk about in a minute in a separate slide. And it's important to realize that the PKP PN specifically only is interested in the published version of the published content in an OJS journal, the galleys, in other words. None of the workflow or other kinds of content that is not public facing is preserved. And because it is a dark archive and because it operates at scale, we have over 15,000 journals in it. It does not offer tools that allow a journal manager or someone else associated with the journal to get the content out easily. It's kind of by design. It is not a replacement for regular backups. So we encourage journal implementers to have proper IT-based backups so that they can restore their journal should their server die, for example. That's a different goal than the PKP PN tries to achieve, as I've mentioned a little bit earlier in the presentation. What is a trigger event? A trigger event is the thing that happens that will take a journal from the dark archive of the PKP PN and make it readable by the reading public again. In other words, the journal in its original website, its original OJS website, has ceased to be accessible for any number of reasons. There are two kinds of triggers, and to be honest with you, we're still working these out a little bit in the PKP PN because we've only seen a couple in the last 10 years. And Mariya is going to show you a couple of those journals in a few minutes. But the two kinds of triggers that we've identified are a manual trigger, where the journal manager notifies PKP that they are no longer able to run the journal and it's going to cease operations, and they formally request that their journal be extracted from the dark archive of the PKP PN and made accessible. An automatic trigger is a little bit more complex, and this is the one that we are trying to figure out a bit more. That is PKP actively monitors the accessibility of all journals that are registered in the PKP PN. And if there is a pattern of loss of access, then that is noticed, and we then ask the question, is this journal ready to be triggered? In some cases, it won't be because just happens that the website is down for an extended period of time. In other cases, it will be because the website has ceased to exist. OJS no longer is available, running the original version of the journal, and PKP, because of its stewardship role in the PKP PN, feels like it needs to step in and inquire a little bit more deeply to see if this journal should be triggered. Mariya, do you want to take over at this point? I know yours is the next slide, but since we link to these two journals, do you want to take over?
Sure, absolutely. Let me share my screen.
Yeah. Sorry. There you go.
Everyone, can you just give me a thumbs up that my slides are showing? Yay, great. So I hope Mark has convinced you that preservation is a good idea and that it's something that is good to start doing as soon as you can. And now I will show you how. If you are using OJS, it is very straightforward because OJS already comes with a PKP PN plugin. There are just a few eligibility criteria or prerequisites for you to start using it. And they have to do with your OJS version and a couple more things. So let me show you. To start using your PKP PN plugin on OJS, your OJS has to be on version 3.1.2 or newer. How do you find that out? I will show you on my demo journal. So if you're looking at an OJS site, it doesn't have to be yours, by the way. It can be any OJS site. You can scroll all the way down where you would have the standard logo for OJS PKP. And if you click on that logo, it will take you to the About Open Journal Systems page. And that is where your OJS version is displayed. So this version is 3.3, etc. So it's higher than 3.1, which means that I can run PKP PN plugin on this version. Now, if your journal is using an earlier version than 3.1, it's probably a good idea to upgrade anyways, because that way you will get security fixes, better UX, better functionality. And it's always a good idea to be on the most recent version of the long-term support release. Current long-term support release is the version 3.3, which I'm running here. And the new long-term support release will be version 3.5, which will be out in the coming months. The next requirement for using PKP PN is to have an ISSN. Your journal has to have an ISSN and you have to enter it under your masthead settings right here. So your journal should, of course, have an online ISSN since you're publishing online. You might also have a print ISSN if you are publishing in print in parallel. So make sure it is entered here. And the final prerequisite is for the journal to have published at least one issue so it could start getting preserved in PKP PN. So let's say you satisfy all of those three criteria. What do you do then? You would go to your plugin section and you would identify PKP PN plugin either under installed plugins or under gallery. So if it is under installed plugins, then you will find it here. If you're not finding it here, then likely it just needs to be installed from your gallery and you can ask your site administrator to do that for you. Now, once it is installed, obviously you want to enable it, but the important point here is that it is not enough. In addition to checking this checkbox, you need to go to the settings and agree to the terms of use as Mark described. Of course, you want to read those terms of use first. Before you check all the checkboxes, make sure that you can agree to them. And once you click Save, you will be assigned a journal identifier. You won't really need it much unless you are looking to troubleshoot specific technical issues with your deposits. Once you have done that, be patient, because it will take from a few days to a few weeks for PKP PN to pick up your previously published content. And once it is picked up, it will start being displayed here under your status. For each issue, you will see the status that it has been completed or maybe in progress. And I will show you how to double check that your journal is preserved. But the important point here is that you will be seeing this status for some time after you enable PKP PN, so just be patient. All right, I'm going back to my slide. I have talked about how to enable the plugin. And now I want to talk about how to check that your content is actually being preserved. As Mark explained, the archive is a dark archive, so you cannot just navigate to a website and enter your journal information and see that your issues are there. We need some kind of a proxy mechanism to tell us that the content is being preserved. And that proxy mechanism is called the Keepers Registry. It is run by the same organization that runs the ISSN International portal, so you can find information in the same place. And it doesn't just record information about preservation in PKP PN, but in all other preservation networks. So to check your status, you would go to the ISSN portal, just like you would if you were checking your journal's ISSN. You would enter your journal's ISSN and navigate to the landing page. And here you would have two tabs. One is just the resource information, talks about your journal's ISSN, etc. And the other is your archival status. And this is where you will find the details of whether your journal is preserved, who the publisher is, and who the keeper is. In this case, the keeper is the PKP PN, but it could be Locks or Clocks or Portico, or it can be multiple keepers here. And if you want to see the specific details of which issues have been preserved, you can see them if you click on the little eye, and you will see the specific issues that have been deposited. And if you see some discrepancy, for example, maybe you have published issues 7, 8, 9, and they're not here, and that's when you can start investigating why they're not preserved. Maybe you need to do some troubleshooting. Our PKP PN guide is available to help you with that. And you can also request support on the PKP forum if you cannot resolve the issues yourselves. Now, one little thing I wanted to point out here before I navigate away, because someone just asked me the other day, on the resource information page, Keepers Registry says no online access. And someone from a journal asked me, why does it say so if my journal is online? It looks like that is how Keepers Registry identifies access to the archived content. So it means that there is no online access to the content that has been preserved. It is still in the dark archive. If eventually it gets restored from the dark archive, then this status should change. But for now, it is not about your journal's current status. It is about the archive. That's what I found out. All right, so I promised, and Mark promised to show you a couple examples of the preserved journals, and you will be able to find them under ogspreservation.publicknowledgeproject.org. Currently, we have 2, and 2 more are in the pipelines to be added to this install. As you can see, this looks like a regular OJS install, and the journal looks like an out-of-the-box default theme OJS journal. The main thing here is access to the actual published content. So these issues have been pulled from the archive, the metadata has been pulled from the archive, the galleys. So all of this content is now discoverable and accessible again. Now, a couple things to point out here. You will notice that articles have PDFs. Oh, sorry, articles have PDFs, but articles also have DOIs. That is what I wanted to draw your attention to. So if your journal was using DOIs before it ceased publication, as part of this recovery process from PKP PN, PKP will be able to take over those DOIs and work directly with Crossref to redirect your DOIs to this recovered website so that your DOIs still point to where your article lives. And another point I wanted to make is that even though this looks like an OJS website, the only thing it contains is the published content. We have the default navigation menu items here with about the journal, etc., but they do not contain information about the journal because, as Mark explained, this information doesn't get preserved as part of PKP PN. Information on your website, how your website looked, any sidebar menus, this doesn't get captured. And I will talk about how that information can get captured through different means. And to talk about that, I need to talk about other preservation services that exist in this space. So far, we've mainly been talking about PKP PN because that's the most accessible and free and easy to use service for OJS journals. But even if you're using OJS, it does not mean that you are stuck with PKP PN only. You have access to other preservation networks from within OJS. OJS has a connection with Clocks, for example, which is a subscription service that can archive your content if you have an agreement with them. It has access to Portico through a Portico plugin, and you might already have access to Portico through a library that your journal is hosted under, or through your publisher, or through your consortium, or through your institution. So I suggest you explore these options. Of course, enable PKP PN first. If there's something you come out of this workshop with, then just do that as a first step. But having your content in additional preservation networks will only increase the chances of its longevity. And then there are a couple more services that are not typically what we call digital preservation in the strict sense, but are helpful to capture some of the content that might not be captured through preservation services. Like the Internet Archive, for example. You may be familiar with the Wayback Machine that allows you to look back in time and see how websites looked in the past. And that is the tool that can allow you to capture the website's looks and all that information I mentioned on the About pages or submission pages that do not get preserved in PKP PN. Now, the Internet Archive is not the best tool for capturing your full text articles because it does not reliably drill down all the way to individual PDFs. So I would not rely on it to do that job, and it's not its job. But if you want to go back and see what your journal looked like after it ceased publishing, or if you want to recover some of that information that was on the masthead, for example, then it will be a great tool for that. Usually it captures content automatically without you having to do anything, but I suggest that you go to the Wayback Machine and enter your website's URL. You can just do it here, Web Archive, and make sure that it is getting captured. Because if you have any blockers on your site that instruct bots to ignore your website, then the Internet Archive will honor that and they will not harvest you. So just double check that it's happening. And of course, if you can, support the Internet Archive. They're doing a great job. And another related project is Project Jasper, which is a partnership between DOAJ, Clocks, Internet Archive, Keepers Registry, and PKP. It is led by DOAJ, and it helps journals that are indexed in DOAJ, which is the directory of open access journals, to find different pathways to get their content preserved. So if you are a journal that is indexed in DOAJ and you are using OJS, then they will suggest that you go the route of PKP PN because that's the most straightforward one. If you're not using OJS, then they might route you to Clocks, and they might even help you with the Clocks preservation. And another cool thing that Project Jasper does is that if your journal was indexed in DOAJ and then it ceased publishing, and then it got recovered, let's say through PKP PN or through Clocks, then it can continue being indexed in DOAJ and its content can continue live in DOAJ, even though the journal no longer is operational. In the past, it would have been pulled from an index, and in most indexes, a journal that ceases publishing will be pulled from an index, but Project Jasper allows the journal to continue living in DOAJ and continue being discoverable that way. I'm going to leave you with a few links. So Kate shared the slides earlier on, and you will get access to these slides after the workshop, after the webinar as well. So we have the PKP PN plugin guide that will explain how to enable the plugin and also how to troubleshoot it if something isn't working. And we also have our free community support forum where you can request additional assistance. And if you think that PKP is doing a great job, then we would love for you to get involved. If you have expertise to share on the community forum, if you see any questions you can answer and help fellow OJS users, we would love for you to participate. We have several interest groups that you're welcome to join. You can contribute code if you have developed something interesting for your own institution or for your own journal. And we also host sprints every now and then in different parts of the world, and we would love for you to attend. All of that information is available on our website, and you're also welcome to get in touch through our web form. And I think now is the time to open it up for questions. I'm going to pass this over to Kate.
Thank you, Mariya, and thank you, Mark. That was really great. Lots of very valuable information there. We do have a couple of questions in the Q&A, so I will go ahead and read those out to you. So the first is, since the PKP PN is only focused on public content, if a journal uses open peer review and shares the reviewer's report as part of the publication, will that content also be preserved?
Mariya, do you want to go ahead or you want me to?
So Mark and I both inhaled to answer and then both paused. So if the journal publishes peer reviews as a galley that is part of an article, then they will be captured as a galley that is part of an article. If you're using some other mechanism to publish these peer reviews, then please tell us more about that, and then we'll be able to see how exactly that content may or may not get captured. Mark, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Only that was a great answer.
Thank you. Yeah, great. And the second question, if an institution becomes a LOCKSS member and hosts a PKPPN LOCKSS server, is there an additional way to monitor the content other than going to the Keeper registry?
I can take a stab at this one, Mariya, if you'd like. No, well, yes, there is, but it is specific. Like a LOCKSS box, like a LOCKSS node, has a way, provides a tool for administrators to monitor what's in that LOCKSS node. So answer to your question is yes, but I'll qualify by saying it is not specific to the PKP PN. It is more a feature of the LOCKSS software.
Great.
Yeah, that said, can I add one more thing,
Mark,
Kate?
yeah.
I mean, depending on what, so a LOCKSS node provides ways of extracting what is in that node. And ideally, and if the LOCKSS network is running as it should, all of the nodes have exactly the same content. That varies a little bit, but the LOCKSS system kind of has ways of making sure that it corrects any gaps across the nodes. But you can extract information about what is in your node easily if you can use APIs and write a script to do that. So you can extract things like a CSV report, for example, from a LOCKSS box with a little programming. There's that option, and there's the web graphical user interface option in the LOCKSS box, in addition to the Keeper's registry.
Great. So that was all the questions we had in the Q&A. Oh, we have another one coming in the chat. And what I'm also going to do right now is give our participants the ability to unmute. I will ask, if you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand and we'll invite you to unmute, but you're welcome to do so now. A question in the chat, are there any limits in the size of galleys to go into the PN?
I don't think so.
I don't believe so. I have never heard of that.
Great. And I see that Pierre, you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
Yes, thanks, Mark. Thanks, Mariya. My question is, so the PKP PN is not a group. We cannot participate as you mentioned, if we want to get involved and things like this, we cannot participate like we can, for example, to the tech user group, or there's other documentation groups, but there's no PKP PN groups, right?
Not in the sense of being an interest group, if that's what you're asking. Now, in the sense of if you would like to become an institution that would like to host a PKP PN node, that maybe I'll pass that over to Mark to comment.
Yes, certainly, Pierre. If you're thinking about hosting a node, then that is something that PKP would be very interested in talking to you about. We currently have a couple of nodes, like imagining a map of the world.
Yeah.
We have a couple of nodes in central Canada and central US, so in that kind of part of Eastern North America already. We have one node in Europe. It would be it would be optimal if we had nodes in South America, Eurasia, and other places other than that, other than the ones we have kind of a lot in. We've also got a couple in the lower southern, like British Columbia, southwestern Canada. But we're welcome. I would very much like to speak to you about your desire to host a node if that's what you're talking about. But Mariya is correct that there are no kind of user groups around the PKP PN. It's
okay. Thanks.
Great, thank you. So we had a follow-up in the chat regarding the question about the maximum size, that someone received an error that deposit failed because the maximum size was exceeded. So Mariya has posted a suggestion to please post this question in the community forum so we can further investigate and follow up with you about that issue. And then another question in the Q&A about where the dark archive is hosted, actual server locations and hosted nodes.
Yeah, I actually have just added a link to the chat that leads to the general page that describes PKP PN, but one of the things on it is the list of PN nodes that are distributed across different institutions. So the dark archive is not hosted in one single place. As Mark explained, this is one of the core tenets of the lots of copies keep stuff safe, is to distribute them geographically and institutionally. So you will see on that list that there are countries across the globe that each have a copy of your content, and they have a way to balance out the copy. So if one institution's archive goes down, the other archives can feel it. It's called self-healing, which I really love. I think it's just such a warming term. I think a minimum of 3 institutions are required to make sure that there is no conflict between 2 different copies.
Great, thank you, Mariya. Okay, so I again welcome further questions. We do have a few minutes remaining. Feel free to raise your hand and ask a question or ask in the chat or the Q&A. And maybe while you're thinking of your questions, there's a couple of additional things I wanted to share that just came to mind during the presentation. We heard a lot, especially from Mark, about the importance of technical durability for your OJS installation, the importance of things like backups and server security. So I wanted to point out that we do have some documentation from PKP, which provides a suite of resources to help you run, deploy, maintain, and upgrade your software, your PKP software. So I will share a link to that. And then double check the chat again to see if there's anything further.
I just wanted to point out that Jonas came in and commented that PKP PN deposits are currently limited to 1 gigabyte, which I didn't know, so thank you, Jonas.
Perfect, thank you, Jonas. And then one other thing related to that point about that I just made about the security of your server and hosting for OJS and PKP's other software. PKP also offers professional fee-based hosting for folks who are interested in having some of these services provided for a fee. So that includes your installation and hosting for the software, daily backups of your data, security patches and bug fixes, upgrades, unlimited storage, priority email-based support, preservation in the PN is included, and use of a custom domain. So that's our hosting services. So I will share a link to that too, in case folks would like to explore that option. Sorry, that link didn't work. I will grab it here, unless... Mariya, are you able to actually grab that link? Or actually, sorry, no, you go ahead, because I'm going to ask you another question here. Okay, so we're still just having some questions come in about the size limit, the 1 gigabyte, if that's per journal or per installation. Or I'm thinking that's probably per item.
It's per issue.
Per issue, okay.
Well, if it's deposit, the language that Monique and Jonas confirmed is deposit. So a deposit is like on publication. the publishing an issue is what initiates the PKP PN plugin to start packaging up that issue for deposit into the network. So given that language, it would be per zip file for that issue. I think, Monique, you should mention this on the forum because there might be a way to work around it. I think it would be exceptional. This is the first I've ever heard of, but it would be exceptional that an issue would be bigger than a gigabyte, and that's zipped as well. So.
Okay, thank you. I will. I have quite some other errors, so maybe I can make a list and then I'll put it on the forum.
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Thank you, Monique. Okay, so if there are no further questions, I will go ahead and close the webinar for today. I'd like to send another huge thank you to our presenters, Mark and Mariya. Thank you for the very helpful information today and answering all the questions as well. If folks are interested in getting involved, please do contact us. We'd love to hear from you. I'll just put that contact us link again in the chat, and I will be following up with a copy of the slides and the presentation recording in the coming days. Keep an eye out for our other webinars as well. We do host these throughout the year, and we would love to hear from you about any topics you'd like to hear from us for future webinars as well. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. I'll go ahead and end the recording.